They found her in the shade of a dying ox, not standing, not sitting, just folded like a shirt someone forgot to wear. Her back leaned against the wheel of a mining cart so rusted, the metal had flaked off in red curls like scabs. She wasn't tied, wasn't caged, but the way her arms hung rope burned at the wrists, elbows half locked told a different story. She was 38, though no one guessed it. Her face looked sandblasted, browned, chiseled by wind and soot. Her scalp was patchy, hair cut with a blade not meant for humans. Her fingers weren't fingers, more like shapes where fingers used to be. Bent, fused, cracked open in places the flesh should have sealed. One pinky was missing. The stub was smooth, like she'd learned to work without it. No one asked her name. Not the miners who left her there, nor the foreman who wiped his nose with a red rag and said, "She's too busted for pay. You want her, take her." Not even the rancher who stood 10 paces away, boots dusty, hat low, squinting at her like he was trying to see if she'd already died. She hadn't. Her chest rose slow, unsure like breath was something she had to relearn. A fly landed on her lip. She didn't blink, didn't twitch, just stared at the sun bleeding through the broken wagon spokes. The deal was done in silence. One coin, not tossed, just placed on a crate beside the ox. And like that, she was his. But she didn't stand. He waited. The rancher was a man of slow decisions. He didn't raise his voice, didn't bark, just reached down, not to lift her, but to drop a water skin on the ground, then turned. Walked. She followed 5 minutes later, not because she was called, but because her legs remembered what it meant to obey. She dragged something behind her, a small wooden box lashed with copper wire. It made a scraping sound in the dirt. No wheels, no lock, just heavy enough to leave a scar in the earth, but not heavy enough to slow her. The trail was 12 miles. She didn't ask to ride, didn't ask anything. Midway through, her right foot bled. A gash opened along the ball of her foot, revealing meat beneath. She stuffed it with gravel and kept walking. The rancher noticed but only glanced once, then tore a strip from his shirt, tossed it behind him without a word, and kept riding. She picked it up, wrapped her foot like she'd done it 1,000 times. She probably had. They reached the ranch just before sunset. A barren spread, no fence, no barn roof, just ribs of timber held together with stubbornness and rusted nails. The house was more shed than shelter. A tarp flapped over a shattered window like a broken wing. She didn't pause, didn't wait for permission, just walked straight to the stoop, sat cross-legged like a mule dropped in the dust, and placed her box beside her. One hand rested on it like it was a child. He unsaddled the horse. She watched. He fed the chickens. She didn't move. He filled a pot from the rain barrel. She flinched at the sound of water, but her eyes didn't leave the horizon. That night, coyotes sang like widows down the canyon. She didn't sleep, not once. Her back leaned against the wooden wall, eyes wide, fingers twitching like she was waiting for a whip that never came. At dawn, the rancher stepped out holding a tin mug of boiled coffee, no sugar, no milk. He placed it near her. She didn't touch it. Instead, she opened the box. Inside, nothing but cloth, folded and refolded so many times it looked like paper. She peeled back each layer, careful, precise, until she reached the bottom. There, buried like a secret, was a single item, a child-sized glove made of tin, bent, burned, thumb split. The kind of thing only made in places where small hands mine deep holes. She held it like it was glass, then quietly placed it in her lap and began stitching a tear in her dress with thread pulled from her own hem. No one spoke. The rancher watched her from the porch, one hand resting on his knee. He didn't ask where she came from. He could guess. There were places far north where orphans were taken at 5, branded as property, and sent into earth-black holes to extract coal until their lungs turned into ghosts. Few survived past 20. Even fewer remembered their own names by 30. By 38, most were already dead, buried under names they never chose. But this one, she was alive, not because she wanted to be, but because death had never stopped to collect. Her emotional symbol wasn't the glove. It was her hands broken, bent, brutalized, still moving, still stitching, still pouring, or still cleaning. No one told them they could stop. She was a woman who never learned stillness, because stillness, for her, had always meant punishment. And the worst part, she didn't look tragic. She looked normal, like suffering had become such a habit. It wore the shape of routine. Somewhere, deep inside, she still believed she had more to earn before she could rest. And the rancher, he saw that. Didn't say a word, but that night too, when he cleaned the mug she didn't drink from, he left it on the windowsill, facing east. Maybe tomorrow she'd drink, maybe not, but for now she was no longer in a hole. She was above ground, and the sky, wide and pale, didn't ask anything from her. Not yet. He never asked why she came, just as she never asked why he lived alone. That second morning, before sunrise, he found her standing in the henhouse, silent, barefoot, one hand gently beneath a hen's belly. The egg still warm when she handed it to him. Not a smile, not a word, but in her gray eyes, something unreadable flickered. Not gratitude, not hope, more like tell me what to do, and I'll do it. He didn't. Instead, he boiled the egg, halved it, and left one piece on the porch rail beside her cracked glove. That glove, it hadn't moved since she placed it there, but the cloth beneath it was folded neater now, pressed as if it mattered, as if someone might someday open it and not find shame. He spent most of that day fixing the pump. His fields were dry, too dry. The summer had no heart. Dust rose with every footstep, hung in the air like breath held too long. She watched him from the shade, her feet tucked beneath her skirt, sewing a patch over the knee of his trousers. The stitch was tight, tighter than it needed to be. By noon, he'd run out of nails. By dusk, she'd organized the whole tool shed without being told. That night, when he pulled off his boots, a tiny stack of polished horseshoes sat on the floor beside the hearth, cleaned, sorted, tagged by size. He hadn't even seen her enter the stable. He stared at them for a long time, then stared at her. She sat cross-legged near the wall, staring back, not with fear, not with expectation, just recognition. Dust settled between them. And then he said it. The first real thing since he brought her home. You done more than I have in months. She didn't answer, but for the first time her shoulders lowered, not in comfort, in permission. The next day they worked side by side, not like equals, not yet, but like two ghosts slowly remembering they had bodies. He chopped kindling, she stacked it. He pulled weeds, she shoveled earth. By sunset, the front stoop was swept clean, something that hadn't happened since his wife died 3 winters back, taking with her the only child that ever tried to call that place home. That evening, she lingered at the window. Her eyes caught the glint of something small and old on the rancher's shelf, a child's horseshoe painted red. She didn't ask, just looked at it like it was sacred. Then he noticed, but didn't explain. He hadn't spoken his child's name in years. Instead, he turned back toward the fire and placed another log inside. A long silence passed, not empty, heavy, like shared air before a confession. Then, softly, she spoke. Your girl liked red. He nodded, no more than that, and she didn't press. But later that night, when he woke to fetch water, he found the small wooden box moved. Not opened, just placed beside the red horseshoe, as if to say mine too. It rained the next morning, not much, just a whisper, but enough to pull the scent of life from the dust. She stepped out onto the porch, head tilted to the sky, palms open. The rain touched her like a question, not a blessing, not yet. He watched her from the window, the way she didn't flinch, didn't wipe it off, just let it soak her hair, trace her collarbone, fill the cracked glove resting in her hand. That glove tin, useless, child-sized, had no purpose anymore. But she held it anyway, not like she wanted to forget. She didn't dare forget. And he understood that too well. At noon, the plow broke a blade in the far field. The metal twisted on a hidden rock and the whole rig collapsed sideways. So he cursed, sat down in the dirt, looked like he might stay there. But then, without a word, she was beside him, holding the wrench before he even asked. Her knuckles scraped, hands bleeding again. The same wounds reopened from before. He didn't take the wrench. He took her hand, wiped the blood away with the edge of his shirt. She didn't pull back. And in that moment, one so brief it could have been missed, he saw her breathe. Not mechanically, not like survival, but like something inside her, long dead, had just remembered how. After they fixed the blade, they didn't speak. They just walked back together side by side, boots and bare feet leaving mismatched prints in the softening dirt. Later that night, the wind howled across the plains. She sat on the floor near the fire, holding the tin glove with both hands. He stood nearby, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. When he handed one to her, she paused, then took it. No trembling this time, just quiet hands, warming around warmth. And as she drank slow, uncertain, the rancher looked at her, eyes narrow with something new. Not pity, not responsibility, but recognition. Of a kind of strength the world never honors, of a kind of woman who never asked to be saved and so deserved it most. And maybe he didn't know it yet, but something had already shifted, because that night, when he took off his boots, he didn't leave them near the door. He placed them on the porch, right next to a pair of stitched-together sandals she'd made from scrap leather. His dusty, hers, clean, side by side, waiting for morning. The third morning, she didn't wait for him to rise. By the time the rooster scratched at the dirt, she'd already chopped vegetables and scrubbed the basin, milked the goat, and laid out 2 metal plates, one cracked, one chipped. She didn't do it to please. She did it like breathing, like labor was the only language her body remembered. When he stepped into the kitchen, hair still wet from washing, he froze. She wasn't looking at him. She was wrapping her palm with torn linen, sealing another wound from a splintered bucket. Her face didn't flinch, just tightened in places only long-term pain could reach. He approached slow, silent, poured water into the pan without looking directly at her. But the closeness, 5 feet, then 3. Then 1 brought something unfamiliar into the air. Heat. Not from the stove, from memory. His fingers twitched toward the cloth on her hand but didn't touch. Instead, he offered a different gesture, a match. Unlit, held between thumb and forefinger like a peace offering. She took it, struck it, lit the burner. That was all. But in that exchange, something sacred passed. A permission, a rhythm, a question neither one dared form aloud. After breakfast, she found a broken piece of mirror nailed beside the doorframe. It was the size of her palm, cracked across the middle, but she looked into it anyway. Not at vanity, just inventory. The reflection startled her, because for the first time in years her face was clean, not just wiped, but washed. With care, the creases under her eyes were still there, but no longer hidden under soot. The cracked lip looked pink again, and the neck, once constantly bowed, now tilted at a quiet, cautious angle, as if testing what it meant to rise. He passed behind her then, paused, said nothing, but their eyes met in the mirror's shattered line, and she didn't look away. That afternoon, he set up a chair under the tree, the only one on the property that hadn't died. Its limbs were skeletal, but still bore a few leaves. She sat without asking. He brought her a tin of salve, not new, not fresh, but it smelled of lavender and lard, and when she rubbed it into her hands, she exhaled. He watched from a distance. That exhale, it wasn't loud, but it cracked something invisible. She sat there for hours, palms open to the breeze, like she was trying to let her body know it was allowed to stop. And when a bee landed on her wrist and didn't sting, she didn't swat it. She just watched it. Stillness had always been danger to her. Stillness was when the belt came down. Stillness was when the chains returned. But that day, under that tree, in a place too quiet for cruelty, she began to relearn a different kind of stillness, the one that didn't punish, the one that soothed. By evening, she began humming. Just a note or two broken, hoarse, uncertain. The tune wasn't happy. It sounded like something made to ward off ghosts. He heard it, didn't interrupt, just stepped onto the porch and began sanding the edge of the rocking chair he'd started repairing. Not for her, not yet, just something to do with his hands. Hands his were wide, calloused, slow to open. Hers still curled slightly like they'd forgotten how to stretch. But she reached toward the salve again, and this time, rubbed it in circles, gentle ones. Later, she cooked without flinching when the pan hissed. The heat used to trigger something in her, a memory she couldn't suppress. But now, she moved around it, reclaimed it. He noticed, and when she burned her thumb and didn't hide it, he placed a tin cup of cool water beside her. No words, just presence. Sometimes that was the better balm. That night, she stepped outside alone. The moon was thin, like a scar healing over. She carried a candle in one hand. In the other, the child-sized glove. She set the glove down on the porch rail and placed the candle beside it, lit it, then just stood there, breathing, not praying, not grieving, just being. He joined her a few minutes later, held his cup of coffee like a lifeline. They didn't speak, but their shoulders stood inches apart, and the silence between them wasn't hollow anymore. It was full of things unsaid, of things becoming. Before going back inside, she touched his arm, not to thank him, not to ask, just touched it, brief, but firm. And in that touch, he felt something no man had ever been able to name without losing it. Respect. Not for what he'd done, but for what he hadn't done. He hadn't rushed her, hadn't spoken too soon, hadn't touched her without cause. And she noticed, because for women like her, silence wasn't emptiness, it was safety, it was sacred. That night, she finally slept, not sitting, not leaning, but lying down, her hands folded over her belly, the cracked glove resting near her head like a sentinel, and just before her breath slowed fully, she smiled, barely, but it was there, as if in the rhythm of routine, in the quiet of care. Her hands had finally remembered what it meant to stop working and simply be held. It began with a hammer and ended with a ghost. He was fixing the back step, a loose board threatening to break every time someone passed. The rancher had taken 3 nails from his tool pouch, only to find none matched the board's grain. He cursed under his breath, stood and said, almost apologetically, "Might be one in your box." She didn't answer, just nodded. That box, the one lashed with copper wire and cloth, the one she dragged behind her that first day, she always kept it tucked beneath her cot, wrapped in old flour sacks like it might bite if seen. He walked inside, hesitated by the threshold of her room, not out of fear, but reverence. Everything in there was placed with precision, not decorative, functional, but neat in a way that suggested order was the only thing she ever had control over. He crouched beside the cot, slid the box out. It made no sound, but when he lifted the lid, the air changed. Not colder, just heavier, like breath before a burial. Inside, no nails, only memory. A folded paper with a line of stick figures drawn in charcoal, 12 small bodies. One with a red X over the face. A child's spoon, blackened at the handle. A glove made of tin, another identical but rusted through the palm. A stone, not rare, not polished, but shaped like a molar. And a crumpled note, her lucky tooth. Never take it off her. He paused, didn't touch anything. But as he set the lid back down, her voice came from behind him, flat, matter of fact, like she was reporting the weather. That box was my life. But it never filled. He turned. She didn't look angry. She didn't look anything. Her eyes had returned to that faraway place again, the one made of mine shafts and child labor camps and meals paid in bruises. He stood, said nothing, waited. She stepped past him, kneeled at the box, removed the folded paper, opened it on her lap. Us 12? From Block C. They didn't give us names, just letters. I was G. She pointed to the X. That was D. She talked too much. Didn't wake up one morning. We had to carry her out in the coal bucket. The rancher knelt beside her, slowly, like approaching a wild thing you don't want to scare. She didn't stop talking, didn't cry. Every time one of us died, we added a mark. The guards didn't notice a dun-duh, or maybe they didn't care. Her fingers traced each figure like reading braille. We weren't allowed to keep things. But I stole the spoon from the cook, said it belonged to my sister. I never had a sister. She opened her palm, placed the stone in it. My mother gave me this when I turned 5, told me if I held it, I wouldn't get taken like the others. She looked at it for a long time, then whispered she was wrong. The rancher didn't reach for her, didn't speak, just sat beside her, their knees almost touching, his boots covered in hay dust, her skirt thin at the hem. After a moment, she turned, met his eyes, not defiantly, just openly. I never wanted to tell anyone. He nodded. Then don't. But I wanted you to know. He nodded again. Then I do. It was the kind of conversation that didn't need more words. Not everything broken wants fixing. Sometimes it just wants to be seen. She carefully placed the paper back in the box, folded the cloth over it, shut the lid, rewrapped it in the flour sack. Then she stood, walked to the door, paused, and then turned. Her face had changed, not softened, just cleared, like a fog lifting. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. He thought for a long time, then said, "Didn't buy you. Just paid to end something." Her mouth twitched somewhere between a grimace and a smile. That evening, she didn't eat in silence. She spoke. Only a sentence, but enough. "These beans are better than anything I ever stole." He chuckled. Not because the food was good, Mert, but because she'd finally said something that didn't sound like the inside of a prison. Later, as dusk fell and the wind picked up, she stood at the porch rail again. This time, the box rested beside her. Open. Not for the world. Just for the air. She let the candle burn beside it. Let the glove catch its light. The flame danced across the tin like a reflection of all the lives trapped beneath the earth. And for the first time, she didn't watch it with fear. She watched it like memory had become a tool. Not a weight. A bridge to what might come next. A quiet laid over the ranch. Coyotes howled again. But she didn't flinch. And when the rancher passed behind her on his way inside, he did something he'd never done before. He reached out and gently brushed her hair behind her ear. A single gesture. Small, but shattering. She didn't react, didn't need to. The silence between them said, "Everything I know what you carry. I'm not asking you to let it go, but I'll carry some of it too." He built her a chair. Didn't say he would. Didn't ask if she wanted one. Just did it. Took pieces of a broken corral gate, sanded them down, shaped the frame with hands that had stitched fence wire for decades. The back legs were mismatched. The seat sloped slightly, and one armrest bore a bullet nick from years ago. But when she saw it placed on the porch at sunset like a waiting promise, she stared at it for what felt like an hour. Didn't sit, didn't smile, just stared, then turned and walked inside. The rancher didn't follow. He sat on the steps that night, sipping coffee, waiting to hear the creak of her weight settling into it. But it never came, because there were still parts of her that hadn't healed, parts he couldn't see. Scars not of skin but rhythm, of muscle memory built from fear, of time spent in places where kindness came wrapped in barbed wire. The next morning, she left the glove on the seat. Just the glove. as if to say, I'm not ready, but I see what you did. And he didn't touch it, didn't move it. That afternoon, they repaired the barn door together. A windstorm had split the hinges loose, and the panels hung like snapped wings. She held the wood while he nailed. Her fingers brushed his more than once. She didn't pull back, but when he placed his hand gently on her shoulder just to steady her, she flinched so violently the hammer slipped from his grip and landed in the dirt. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just stood still, her back to him, breathing like something had ripped loose inside. He picked up the hammer, waited, said softly, "Did I hurt you?" She shook her head, but didn't turn around. Her voice, when it came, sounded like it was crawling out from behind a door that had never opened. No one ever touched me without a reason. He didn't say sorry, didn't make it about himself, just set the hammer down and sat in the dirt, hands open, face tilted to the sun. She finally turned, looked at him sitting there, grounded, not asking, not pushing. And something shifted. That night, she sat in the chair, didn't announce it, didn't wait for witness. She just walked outside as the first stars blinked alive, lowered herself onto the seat with both hands gripping the worn wood, and exhaled. Long, like something inside her had let go. He came out a moment later, saw her, and didn't speak, just stood beside her with his coffee, then took a slow seat on the porch floor, back against the wall. Like they were equals now, not rescuer and rescued, not owner and survivor, just two people with too many ghosts and too few words. She watched the horizon, and then, softly, "You remind me of someone." He looked up. "Who, my brother?" She smiled. It looked strange on her face, like an old photo, faded but real. He used to whistle when he worked. I always hated it, but now I miss the sound. The rancher didn't whistle, but he took a deep breath and hummed, low, tuneless, soft, not a melody, just a vibration in the air. She closed her eyes, and for one fleeting second, leaned her shoulder against his, barely. A brush of fabric on fabric, but enough to feel it, enough to know it was allowed. Later that week, they went to town, not together at least, not walking side by side. She rode the mule, he walked ahead. But when they reached the general store, she lingered outside, didn't go in, didn't want the stairs. So he brought her things instead, needles, a new tin cup, a ribbon she never asked for. She took the cup, ignored the ribbon. But when they got back, she tied it to the porch beam where the chair sat. It fluttered in the wind like a signal, not of beauty, not of vanity, but survival. And he understood, because some scars you couldn't touch, but you could build a space around them. Let them breathe, let them rest. That night, as cicadas sang their dry song and coyotes kept their distance, she said a name, soft, barely audible. He looked over. What was that? She swallowed. Me, my name. He didn't repeat it, didn't say it aloud. He just nodded. Thank you for telling me. And that meant more than anything else could have. The next morning, the glove was gone from the chair, replaced with a flower, pressed, dry, carefully laid in the shape of an open palm. And the chair, for the first time, creaked from weight before dawn, because some scars can't be spoken, but they can be witnessed. And slowly, with time, maybe, they can be forgiven. They rode in on 6 mules in one memory. Dust choked the horizon, first gravel kicked up by hooves like dry thunder. Then came the shadows, 6 men in canvas coats and soot-black hats, their faces creased by smoke and time. Each bore the same symbol stitched to the chest, an upside-down horseshoe and a gear. She hadn't seen it in a decade, but she didn't need to. That mark had been burned into her dreams since childhood. They stopped outside the gate, boots crunching the dead grass. No greetings, no pretense, just the foreman stepping forward, gray beard split by a tobacco wad, chewing like he had all the time in the world. That woman belongs to the company. The rancher didn't move, didn't blink, He just rested a hand on the porch post beside the rocking chair where she now sat, calm, quiet, holding her tin glove in her lap. The lead miner continued, voice thick with entitlement. She was never yours. She was transferred off ledger but not released. You're in breach. The rancher tilted his head. I paid what you asked. That wasn't purchase. That was delayed disposal. He stepped onto the porch. Wrong move. The rancher's hand shifted just slightly to the old rifle leaning by the door frame. The tension hung in the air like a wire drawn too tight. Then she stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly enough that every man had to watch. She walked down the steps barefoot, her skirt brushing the wood, the tin glove swinging lightly in her hand like a bell with no sound. She stopped 3 feet from the foreman, close enough to smell the sulfur on his breath, close enough to remember the night he branded her thumb with the backside of a coal poker. He grinned, teeth brown and broken. You still alive, girl. She didn't answer. She just knelt, not in surrender, in power, and placed the glove flat on the dirt, then stood again, and spoke, not to him, to the air, to the ghosts, to the mountain that once swallowed her childhood. Block C, 12 children, 9 dead, 2 broken, 1 stolen back by silence. She turned to the second man in line. His eyes flickered. You held D down while she screamed. To the third, his lip twitched. You poured oil on our hands to make the cuts close faster. To the fourth, you said the dark was our punishment. And finally to the foreman, when you said I'd never make it past 20. She paused, then said, louder, I'm 38. The silence cracked like dry earth. The rancher stepped down, slow, not rushing, just present. Like a storm walking on 2 feet. He didn't raise the rifle. Didn't need to. The men saw something in him, something ancient. A man who had nothing left to lose, but everything now to protect. The foreman spat. You're making a mistake. The rancher said I've made worse. Another silence. Then the woman picked up the glove. Held it like a badge. I'm not yours. The foreman opened his mouth, maybe to shout, maybe to strike. He never got the chance. 'Cause just then a crack rang out, not from a weapon, but from the sky. Thunder. Real. Sudden. And rain followed. Hard. Immediate. Like the land itself had waited to cry. The men flinched. She didn't. She tilted her head, let the water run down her face. Didn't wipe it. Didn't smile. Just stood there bare. Open. Undefeated. The foreman looked once more into her eyes and saw something he didn't recognize. Not weakness, not trauma, but power. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that survives. He turned, climbed back on his mule. The others followed. No one said goodbye. As they vanished into the rain, she finally turned to the rancher. Her hand was trembling, but she didn't try to hide it. He stepped forward, took the glove from her, held it between them like a treaty. Then, without speaking, he walked to the edge of the property where the ground dipped toward the old irrigation trench and buried the glove there. No ceremony. Just a finality. When he returned, she hadn't moved, but her chest rose and fell in a new rhythm, slower, deeper, freer. They sat together under the porch roof as the storm softened into mist. The ribbon she'd tied to the beam fluttered drenched, but still clinging. She reached for his hand. He took it. Not eagerly, not cautiously, just openly. And in that clasp, they both knew that glove had never fit her. Not even as a child. It was never meant to hold her story, because her story wasn't about the hand that suffered. It was about the hand that chose not to strike back, the hand that planted instead of burned, the hand that held on when every reason said to let go. It began with a hole in the earth, not a grave, not a pit, but a garden bed, 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, dug where the mining men had stood, just beyond the porch where the tin glove had once rested. She carved the rows herself barefoot, hands steady. the dirt cool beneath her fingers like breath from an old friend. The rancher watched from a distance, not intruding, just witnessing, like always. He had learned something precious. To love her was to give her space to arrive on her own. She planted wildflower seeds, sunburst, poppy, desert aster, seeds she'd saved from a crumpled paper envelope in the bottom of her old box, left over from a girl who once thought color might save her. It was the first time she touched soil, not to mine it, but to grow something from it. The rocking chair sat behind her, creaking gently in the wind. The ribbon still danced, but something else had changed. She no longer looked over her shoulder, because for the first time she wasn't waiting for the sound of boots, or metal, or a number barked over a name. She was here, and still, and safe, inside. The rancher had built shelves, not fancy ones, just straight planks nailed to the wall of the small room that was no longer only hers, no longer a corner of survival. She placed the box there, not hidden, visible. The glove was gone, buried, but the spoon stayed. And the drawing, and the stone. Artifacts, yes, but no longer anchors, just reminders of what she'd carried to get here. One evening, while the sun lit the sky gold and the goats brayed low in the pen, he handed her a book, old, water-warped, no cover. I never got past chapter 3, he muttered. She didn't laugh, but she opened it, ran her fingers over the page, then sat on the porch and began to read aloud, slowly, like learning to use a new part of her voice. Her tongue stumbled over words like orchard and mercy, but she said them anyway. He sat on the step, arms over his knees, listening like each syllable rebuilt the silence between them. By the end of the week, she'd read 10 pages. By the end of the month, 30 more. Each night, after the last light dimmed, she read by the porch lantern. And sometimes, she'd stop not because she forgot the word, but because a memory surfaced when she read the word cradle, and her hands froze mid-sentence. He didn't ask, just waited, and when she began again, it was with a voice steadier than before. That spring, the garden bloomed, not all at once, not all evenly, but enough. Enough that the dirt looked less like a battlefield and more like a canvas. She knelt beside the first sprout and whispered something. Not a prayer, just a secret. He never asked what it was. Instead, he brought her a gift, a dress, not new, but washed, fitted, light blue like mountain air. She didn't wear it right away, but she kept it by the window where the morning sun hit. One evening, near the first summer rain, she appeared in it. He looked up from the trough and nearly dropped the pail. Her hair was braided, loose, imperfect, but intentional. The dress fit like memory rewritten. He didn't say she looked beautiful. She wouldn't have known what to do with that. Instead, he said, "Fits the light." She smiled. A full one this time, not cautious, not rehearsed. A smile like wind through new wheat. They ate outside that night, on 2 stools, with fresh bread and goat cheese between them. No conversation, just fireflies, and her hand resting atop his, palm to palm. Later, as he leaned back in the chair, he looked over. "Do you miss anything?" She was quiet a moment, then no. And then, "But I remember everything." That was enough. She planted another row the next morning. This time, squash. She didn't flinch when the spade cut the earth, didn't blink when a beetle scurried by. Her hands scarred, bent, aged beyond their years, moved with grace. Not because they'd forgotten pain, but because they'd survived it. She no longer needed to prove her usefulness. She no longer woke before the sun. Some mornings, she stayed in bed until the rooster crowed twice. And when she finally rose, she did so not from fear but from choice. The chair still creaked, the ribbon still danced, but now, so did she. Once, he caught her humming again, not the broken melody of before, a new one, soft, strong, rooted. And he didn't interrupt, just leaned against the porch post and listened. Because that's what love looks like. Sometimes not rushing in, not fixing, just holding space for someone to become who they were always meant to be. And as the stars came out one by one, like promises finally kept, she stepped into the yard, palms open, head tilted back, dress rippling in the breeze. She didn't bow, she didn't kneel, she didn't flinch. She stood, because the woman who had worked every day of her life had finally learned how to rest. There are people in this world who survive not because they were rescued, but because they refuse to disappear. They go unnoticed, the women who carry too much in silence, the men who give space instead of advice, the souls who bury their trauma like seeds, hoping someday something might bloom. This story isn't just about hardship. It's about recognition, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't shout love, but proves it through presence, the kind that doesn't erase pain but holds it long enough for healing to begin. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It comes in a chair left on a porch, in a garden bed dug by hand, in the space between a question and a choice. We all carry boxes filled with things we never asked for. But what we do with them, that's what defines us. Let someone sit beside you without asking why the box is there. Let them see it and stay anyway, because stillness is not the absence of motion. It is the return of peace. And for those who've been running their whole lives, that moment of stillness, it's everything. It's salvation.